Well, this is a surprise. We're not live, but I'm offering this as kind of a pseudo live stream because I decided that this was some important footage for you to see, and that the concept that we're about to talk about today is important enough to actually give it to you in more of a recorded format rather than the natural live format I usually will take advantage of here in coach certification training. So officially, as always, welcome back to certification. And if you haven't seen one of these before, our purpose here is to solidify and fill in the cracks with or for and bring in other dimensions of the world of your coaching skills beyond what we have time and availability for in the training sessions themselves, and maybe even cover some things that you wouldn't even have thought to ask just because you didn't know what you didn't know, as we might say in the world of personal growth. So today in certification, we're now in week 4, and this is day 2 of week 4, so we're well into our week 4 materials here, and we're talking about strategy coaching, that strategy coaching discipline, the discipline of finding out how someone produces results on the inside and the outside in their life, etc., so that could be transformed, because the transformation of strategy, the transformation of how, is a transformation of life itself, really. So today, title of this phenomenal non-live video is a forensic analysis of transformational coaching. So the idea here is to demystify the magic. This guy is kind of represented as the guru master that is kind of the black box of transformation. And we're sitting here with our little brush and our bunny suit, I guess, and dusting off exactly what's going on here so we can start to lift the veil of this mysterious area that seems so magical to our clients, and frankly magical to most coaches that don't see the mechanics themselves. So that's exactly what we're covering today, and I'm going to give it to you in several different layers. But before I start, I just want to explain one thing. I have basically cured people of their fears of things like flying, swimming in open water, fear of men, fear of women, fear of being outside. Literally, I worked with somebody long ago who had agoraphobia, fear of rejection, which is very common in business and sales and relationships and like almost any area of life. I've also caused people at some point in my coaching career to divorce, to get married, to find passion in their relationship, to change jobs, to forgive people that have been long dead, to get confidence, playful out in a new job, take risks, get off hard drugs for good, quit smoking, quit overeating, lose massive amounts of weight, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And again, just disclaimer, like I'm not in any way trying to claim that I'm somehow a replacement for medical help of some sort if you're in need of healing or curing or anything like that. But when I share that, or if you were to see that happen, you actually could see the kind of people that I've helped in these particular ways, and they would share with you these kind of seemingly magical things that have occurred as a result of our conversations. Do you think that I've got some magic? I think I have a bit of a magic wand here. The truth is, I don't. There's nothing magical about my knowledge. There's nothing magical about my skills. I have no magic to provide you or anybody, but it looks like that a lot of times from the outside looking in. And my thesis of this discussion today is that strategy coaching as a discipline is not magic, it's mechanics. And I'll share a different way of looking at this. Recently, a great man passed away. Now, if you're watching this for the first time when I'm actually filming it, it was literally just a month ago that he died. If you're watching this in the years to come, it probably is a little bit longer, farther away. But this is a gentleman who is a professional magician, speaking of magic, but he also was the founder and kind of like the presiding director of the Skeptics Society, or some other name like that. I don't have the exact information here, but this guy's name is I believe it's James Randi, and he goes in as a magician, sorry, by this moniker, the Amazing Randi. So James Randi, Amazing Randi, call him what you will, but this individual has a very interesting story. He lived, by the way, until he was well into his 90s, just passed away, as I mentioned. And he dedicated his life to being skeptical of what people tried to pass off as supernatural, as magic, as, having some type of otherworldly, non-scientific power. And truly an amazing life story. Years ago, I'm talking about 30 years ago, like in the 70s, I think, 70s, 80s, something like that. He went on the Tonight Show, Johnny Carson Tonight Show, right? And he helped Carson work to set up a gentleman named Uri Geller. And Uri, at the time, if you know anything about Uri's, he would claim to have this magical power to like bend spoons with his mind. I have telekinesis, right? This magical ability. And he would show on camera, he's just like sitting here with a spoon, and the spoon just like bends. Have you ever seen one of those types of the footage like that? Well, this guy did it all the time, right? He claimed to bend spoons with his mind. And so before he came on Tonight Show, they took some spoons, and then James Randi looked at the spoons and made sure they weren't tampered with, and that Uri Geller didn't get his hands on the spoons before it was time to actually bend the spoons, right? So to make sure, absolutely certain that there was no way he could in any way like kind of do anything to somehow stoop people, or somehow trick them into thinking he had some kind of magical power when he really didn't, right? So during the Tonight Show, Uri, this supposedly magical guy who could bend spoons at will, spent 22 minutes trying to bend spoons, and he was unable to perform any of the tricks. He was unable to do anything, because guess what? In the Amazing Randi's presence, who set up a scientific format where there was no way anybody could, do some kind of trickery to dissuade people, to, again, dupe people, he was unable to suddenly do what supposedly was some kind of magical feat. And James Randi, if you read his books or you look at his documentaries or you look at his footage, he's done this again and again and again and again with psychics and mediums and people that supposedly could talk to the dead, and people that can do all these supposedly magical things. Telekinesis is one of those. All these things that so many people believe to exist or have claimed to have existed, by the way, especially people in our profession. It's a lot of very kind of new agey type of coaches out there that, believe in all sorts of stuff that simply is completely unprovable by, rote science, at least. That's not to say that there aren't things that science simply cannot measure, cannot track, cannot disprove, let's say. But there's plenty of things that, just not only can't be proven, but can easily be disproven by science, many of which people, even to this day, have tremendous and superficial amounts of, blind belief, if you will, superstitions, if you will. And people are like superstitious like this, right? But that's the way I kind of look at coaching. And I would probably be very motivated, act like it really was magical powers that I had if I was nothing but a coach and I didn't train other coaches, right? But my job is not to try to come off as a guru or make you think that I'm on some mountaintop levitating here in the yoga position. My job is to show you that I'm not. My job is to hopefully help you to see and understand and appreciate and really believe that the most seemingly magical coaching in the world, the psychic version of great transformational work, is really nothing but mechanics. And that since it's mechanics, that you have 100% access to all of the seeming magic that any other coach or guru supposedly has access to, as long as you do your homework and you practice the actual mechanics of things. So I think James Randi is a great example of this. He really showed us, if you're willing to just, be willing to just take a look at the facts, that most of what people kind of have blind belief in is not necessarily untrue, but there's no reason to believe it's true. There's no reason at all to believe it's true. And so, people might believe it, but there's no greater reason to believe that than it is to believe, other crazy things that no one would ever even, begin to believe. There would be no reason whatsoever to actually believe it. And it doesn't really serve anybody to believe it generally either. Actual magicians trick us into thinking that they have supernatural powers, right? But it's literally, when it comes to magicians, all smoke and mirrors. Like literally that's what they do. They set up mirrors, they put some smoke around, it's misdirection. And, anybody who knows magic, suppose, magician type of craft know that. In fact, if you look up magic tricks and you look up, famous magicians, a lot of their great tricks have been shown mechanically now. You can look it up on the internet and they'll show you where the mirrors are. They'll show you how the lines are mechanically drawn such that people are just amazed by things that really aren't, well, they're kind of amazing. The fact that the mechanics are actually pretty cool, but there's really no magic to it. And again, most people know it, but they kind of don't operate according to that knowledge. They're blown away and surprised to see things that, they can't believe their eyes, so to speak. But that's because the mirror is right there and it's tricking the eye, basically. So magicians are literally mechanics. Like that's all they are. They're really good at mechanics and everybody thinks they're magic, right? Car mechanics, speaking of mechanics, they're probably an even better example or comparison to magicians, because car mechanics are like that too, right? But better. Like no car mechanic is trying to show you that they have magical powers, right? They might be very skilled, they might have great knowledge, they might have amazing experience, but they're not trying to put one over on you, basically. They admit that they have to go to school and understand the intricacies of these little mechanical objects that they work on day in, day out. And that's why they can, pick around in your car and do some supposed wizardry. And then all of a sudden your car runs. And it's like, wow, isn't that amazing? But we're really not that amazed by it, are we? I mean, we pay good money to get them to, go to school and do the work that they have to do. So the bottom line is that like I'm here to make sure that you get that all you are is, a greasy mechanic with a wrench in one hand and a caliper in the other hand, and you need to get into that engine and understand it and discern it. Some of the greatest kind of supposedly magical transformation artists on the planet are people that, frankly, all they did is work really, really, really hard at understanding the intricacies, the depth that goes on within the strategies that human beings use. Like what makes us tick. There's no crazy superstition to believe in, and there is no magical power here. So whether it's, for instance, the emotional fear that we just talked about, fear of like flying, for instance, which I helped one of my clients with very recently, or the inner or outer problems associated with being, let's say, estranged from a loved one, like your daughter, for instance, which we're going to watch in a second, how I helped a mother, get her daughter back and get her relationship with her daughter back. The seemingly magical secrets behind these issues that we're getting into today and that you'll get into in your practice and coaching as well are only mechanics. They really are. I mean, I'm not saying there's not more to it than that. Maybe there is. But you don't need to believe that. And I don't need to believe that. If you just get good at the mechanics, then that will be magical to your client and you'll know better. It's only mechanics, or it may as well be only mechanics. And these clients that you work with, they're not transformed through magic and supernatural wizardry, but through the same mechanics that created the issue in the first place. So as they've said, mankind has created all their problems, and so we can get ourselves out of it. We created them through mechanics, not through magic. So, as I mentioned a second ago, I worked once with a client who would not fly, in planes, right? I don't mean like with his hands, right? Because he was so afraid of flying. And it literally took, I think, one session, maybe 1.5 sessions, to cure him of that fear, which had haunted him for years and years and kept him from making thousands of dollars because he had to travel for a living. And it limited his geographic area through which he could make a difference. And after we get into a little bit of a separate video I'm about to share with you, I'm actually going to explain to you how I did that. And I'm going to give you the mechanics so you can see through what seems like the magic of that and, become the magician yourself, if you will. But first, and before we get into the actual model I'm going to explain to you in just a second, which is actually just about to be in front of you, I would like to share with you a video that I made a few years ago called Transformational Wizardry. And this video actually does get into a little bit more of the mechanics behind the wizardry of a great strategy coach. And so this video is going to cover not only some of the steps and dynamics in true transformation, when somebody really becomes someone new and they have feel and act and live completely differently than the way they used to. I'm actually going to give you a demonstration in this video of transformation that happened for that mother who wanted to reunite with her daughter and what it took to actually create that as well. So without further ado, let's look at transformational wizardry. Hey, this is Jeffrey Suey, and this is a video about transformation wizardry. How to use 3 mysterious phases to rapidly change lives. And in this video, we're going to cover actually 3 things. First, how to develop a client crystal ball. Second, I'm going to show you a real-life example of transformation wizardry in action. And finally, we'll actually review these 3 kind of mysterious phases of transformation. Let's start with how to develop a client crystal ball. If you've ever seen like a fantasy movie or you've ever studied folklore and wizards and magic, some of the stories cover tools, techniques, spells, and abilities that some of these wizards have to see into the future. Like, let's say, using the crystal ball as a tool. They could see something that's far away or see something in the future. Or maybe they're using a certain type of ability like ESP to, read your mind, something like that. The client crystal ball is kind of similar to that. It's a seemingly magical ability, but really it's just a tool that as coaches we can use, and a kind of a mindset that we can put ourselves into to be able to see inside of our client, just like you would stare inside of a crystal ball to see the future, or whatever the crystal ball is supposed to show you, right? And this ability, this tool, helps you to see things within your client that other people, even friends and family members around them, cannot see. Many times, even your client themselves can't see what you are seeing. Sometimes they may even disagree with what you're seeing until you can actually explain it to them at the level where they can start to decipher it and see it for themselves. So the power of the client crystal ball is, number one, to see what nobody else can see around you and have that seemingly magical extrasensory perception, the ESP, to be able to see inside your client and see things that others, including them, can't see. And then to show it to them so they can use that insight, that deep understanding, to actually create the transformation. And that's the beginning of transformation wizardry. I'm going to share with you now this client crystal ball, and this is from a short excerpt from our strategy immersion training within Master Coach University, where we discuss this ability to read and understand deeply your client using what I like to call here the client crystal ball. So let's take a look. Now, when you lead and coach a diverse group of people, you're going to ultimately enter different worlds. And when you explore these different worlds, you're going to be affected. It's going to affect the way you think and your own beliefs and values as well. Because when you truly go into someone else's world, it's gonna impact you. It's not just a concept that we might just talk about theoretically. You're actually emotionally involved with someone. So this is going to impact you, and it's actually going to help you to grow. Because part of being a leader is getting better so there's more of you to give to others. And that growth comes when you totally explore the world of those that you're coaching. So let's talk about these different types. Obviously, there are different strokes for different folks. And sometimes what happens is we get confused about how someone can behave one way in a certain situation that seems so wrong to you when they seem just fine or just so right somewhere else. I mean, if you've ever had a friend or a family member and you think this person is together, they know what they're doing, they're intelligent, I can count on them, and then they just react in a different way than you ever expected. And it's something that goes totally against maybe some of your own beliefs and values. Happens all the time. Now, when you take the time to totally enter and live in their world, though, you really take the time to try to figure out why they actually felt that way, why they actually did that thing that you thought was so wrong. You'll find that there's actually nothing wrong. And you must have a larger level of awareness and appreciation than right or wrong anyway, especially when you're coaching someone. When you think right, wrong, there's something that you're not appreciating. So if you can find a way to appreciate what seems so horrible, the pain that you have about that, the resistance that you have about that, I promise you it will disappear. The capacity to appreciate when everyone else shuns, what everybody else hates, what everybody else goes against, the capacity to at least appreciate it, to be grateful for the things you thought were so horrible, instantly gives you control and power back over the shaping of your destiny. Now, part of entering these different worlds, whether it be a world of your client or just expanding yourself into an even better and more flexible coach, a big part of this is something that they call modeling. And modeling is just the ability to totally explore and reproduce the operating system of someone else. So I'm going to give you an example of this. It's a little bit of a intense example. There's this movie that came out years ago called Red Dragon. And Red Dragon was kind of a thriller, horror, murder type of movie. So definitely very, very intense. And it starred Ed Norton. And Ed Norton, I believe he worked for the FBI. And he had the capacity, had a special skill to find these killers, to find people who had broken the law, who'd committed homicides. And he had this knack, this morbid ability to enter the mind of the killer, to look at a murder scene and just imagine as if he was the murderer, as if he was the person doing it, and imagine what went through that person's mind and how they thought and what they would do next. And eventually he got so deeply into the world of these killers that he'd actually catch the person. And so, for instance, in this particular situation, he caught Hannibal Lecter, right? And he entered his world, and he just felt what he felt. He knew what he knew, and then he figured out what to do. Now, you might not want to enter the world of some kind of killer or something like that because you're not trying to capture somebody, but in a way you are hunting your client. You are hunting and looking for and trying to figure out, as a good detective, kind of what makes them tick, what makes them do what they do. And you need to enter the world of the person that you're coaching and be in that world so deeply that you can think what they're thinking, feel what they're feeling, and anticipate what they'll do, what they think, how they respond. Now, another type of modeling I learned very early on, actually before my coaching career, when I was a musician. And I played the saxophone, and I went to school, and one of my fellow students, who is a really, really fantastic sax player also, he's definitely better than me, at least at the time, and he said this to me one day, because I wanted to get better, I was trying to improve, and he said, go into a room and put on your favorite sax player, and don't come out of that room until you sound just like them. Now, it took years for me to actually take that advice, and then I finally started doing what's called transcriptions and listening to other players and playing along with records, and there's just all sorts of things that we started to do as sax players, and eventually it really paid off well for me. I moved up in school at the time, and I eventually moved to New York. I played professionally in New York for several years. I actually traveled the world playing saxophone because I was a pretty darn good sax player, and people counted on that ability that I had developed. But one of the main ways that I developed the right sound and the technique and got people to really enjoy my playing wasn't because I was actually a very adept player. I was not one of the better players. But I took this advice to heart, and I went into rooms and I just sit there until I sounded exactly like the best sax players in the world. It was a very simple thing. I entered the world of that sax player, and I became them, basically. And even till this day, I can kind of mock different sounds that different players have created over the last century that I actually learned and understood pretty well. It gave me tremendous flexibility and technique on the horn that I never would have had if I hadn't actually done that kind of work. In fact, I actually really tried to get in the head of my teacher at the time. This was early on in my career. His name is Bunky Green. He was a famous saxophone legend. He's kind of a part of the history of jazz saxophone in many ways. And at the time, I really interviewed him and tried to find out what made him tick mentally, what he thought about when he played. And I adopted that as well. So I was not only adopting the sounds of sax players I heard, but I was also adopting the mental syntax, kind of the way somebody thought, how they felt, their physiology, the way they focused when they actually played as a great improviser as well. And it really paid off for me greatly, as I said. Now, what about modeling as a coach? So there are many different layers to this, and obviously we're talking about using modeling not just to understand someone, but to be able to kind of become them. And obviously, again, you may not want to become every one of your clients, right? That may not be an ecological thing, but you at least need to appreciate what's going on inside them so you can be in their world and your world simultaneously. You can bridge that gap and give your resources to them, probably the resources they don't have at that point, or they're at least not focused on at that moment. Now, modeling, great players, let's say, that's different. You may really want to sound like them. Now, on top of that, modeling as a coach, it's not just about modeling your clients and understanding what makes them think the way they do, whether that be empowering or disempowering. It's also about modeling success. So when I first started coaching, I remember this was when I was driving out cross country to go to work for Tony Robbins in San Diego. And this was like over a decade ago, my first coaching gig basically. And I remember listening to people like Jim Rohn on the way out there and really trying to be able to just speak like him. And I mean, he's not exactly a coach. I guess you could consider him a coach as well. A well-known personal development speaker who's passed on now. But at the time, just the way he toned his voice, the way he spoke really was compelling. I mean, obviously it was compelling to a lot of people. And so I wanted to be able to convey that same energy in a coaching session, even if it was just to one person. I wanted to be able to convey that. I felt that was important. So, every day I would listen to the same Jim Rohn. I mean, it wasn't like I was trying to learn what he was talking about. It was only like a couple phrases I was listening to. But I wanted to be able to sound just like him to some extent, and kind of motivate others using that tone of his voice that he had developed. Later on, when I was speaking, I listened to Martin Luther King and learned kind of his tempo and the way that he actually intoned his speeches, which is very unique, by the way, at least outside of his culture at the time, and many other speakers as well. And I also modeled many great coaches in the way they actually coach, their approach to coaching. And if you don't know our immersion trainings, I can tell you that each one of our immersion trainings are actually trainings that took a role model for great coaching, one particular type of coaching that a certain coach had mastered. And actually the whole program is just installing that way of thinking, that language pattern, the physiology, the mental syntax, the approach, the focuses, and the knowledge of that world-class master coach. And so if you're in accountability training, our model was Meg Fritton. She was a master accountability coach. Just was tremendous as an accountability coach. If you're in strategy training, which this video is really part of, you're modeling partly my approach to strategy, which I had mastered for many years, and also other great coaches that were great strategy coaches that I learned from as well. And of course, assessment training, still also working with the same thing, modeling the best assessment coaches that work within our division, as well as the director of the division, to put together the best knowledge base and the best understanding of using assessments effectively as a coach. So you could model how somebody talks, you could model how somebody acts, how somebody thinks, how somebody approaches coaching, and all you got to know is what makes them tick. How do they think? What do they focus on? What's their triad, as we've learned in strategy training, right? And you can interview them, or you can just observe them. You put the cook in the kitchen and observe them. And you will start to be able to adapt these things to yourself, and that will expand much more deeply what you have available to you as well. Now, when you're coaching, again, you may not want to become someone, but you do need to step in their world deeply enough so you understand what's going on. And part of this might be auditory, physiology, language, beliefs, focus, and values, and somebody's life situation or their blueprint for how their life situation should be. All these elements are things that you want to understand about your client. You want to hear how they're talking. What tones are they using? How fast or slow are they speaking? You want to get a sense of, even if you can't see their physiology, you want to get a sense of what their physiology might be. Their language patterns, what words are they using? Their beliefs, focus, and values. You may need to interview them a bit on that. But even if you don't interview them and they just talk, they're going to start revealing a lot of this stuff that they might believe, or things that they feel are important, or what they're focused on, at least in the moment. And then, of course, you can probably get a sense of their life situation, and for that matter, how they think their life situation should be. So all these are elements of really modeling your client, making a model for how they operate, what makes them tick, and taking it on yourself to some extent so you can really experience it and explore that world. You don't have to agree with your client if you enter their world, but at least appreciate why. In fact, many of your clients, you may think, gosh, the last thing I want to do is think like them. Last thing I want to do is have them impact me, is have their world, somehow become my world, because I don't want to be like that person, right? And that is totally okay to feel that way. And remember, just because you're modeling them and understanding them and entering their world while you're coaching doesn't mean that they're going to impact you after the session. You're in control of your own triad. You're in control of your own beliefs, focus, and values. But and so you don't have to agree with your client. You don't even have to like what your client thinks, feels, and is experiencing right now, but at least you got to appreciate why. And then even beyond that, you really need to hopefully empathize, have a little empathy for what's going on with them at the time, because they're human. They share the same neurology. If they're physically healthy, they share the same neurology as you likely do as well. And the more you can do that, the greater power you'll have to serve and influence them. You'll also have a larger realm of understanding of people, of yourself, of them, and of coaching. Now, rather than trying to, and this is a lot of coaches do this, rather than trying to help your clients by getting them to think like you, and that may or may not be useful, consider expanding your own thinking. Because if you only look at one way of looking at life for so long, maybe it's time to investigate some other ways. Because this one is boring as hell. Even if you don't think it is. It is. You can't go to a new level. You can't go to the next level, whether it be in your life or your coaching or in a coaching relationship, using the same level of thinking that got you where you are now. And if you're thinking something's good or someone's good or bad, how the hell do you know? Whose perspective is it good or bad from? Don't get caught up in that type of game, in a kind of a good or bad game, in that judgment. If you're going to judge your client, you're going to judge other people, then you will lose your ability to influence them or probably even relate to them for that matter. So don't get caught up in that, and don't get caught up in your culture's conditioning. To be a leader, you must become more than the conditioning of the current culture that you live in. The culture you live in first is that peer group that you live in. So you don't want to let yourself get too caught up in what other people think or what your peer group is deciding and make that be your judgments that you'll place upon other people, because cultures are generally full of lots of rules, lots of ways it should be, and cultures, generally speaking, if you look at most cultures, most peer groups, most groups of people, they will generally pass judgment on just about every other culture that's not them. Anybody outside of their own ethnocentric or egocentric focus. And so if you really want to lead, you got to get out of that headspace. You got to be beyond the current culture, beyond the conditioning of the current culture that you live in, because every culture has limiting conditioning. Now the point of all of this is to enter your client, be in them. Now let me give you an example. You may have actually seen this in our Master Coach DVD course. If not, I can always send you a link to this video. But this is an intervention that I did in a live certification training a couple years back, and I was working with a mom at the time, and we were talking about the kind of how she works and what makes her tick and the challenges that she's having and things like that, and she had lost her job, and she was going through a lot of sense of loss of significance because she was very significance driven. But that was really actually covering up a real drive for connection. Her way of getting connection was just through a significance filter. So everything had a rule: I have to be significant, and then people will like me, then people will love me. And she was very disconnected from her daughter at the time. They had gone through a lot of challenges over the last decade, and so she was talking about some of those and how it had manifested, basically. But the bottom line is, she started to talk about how things weren't working and how basically the way she was showing up was actually negatively impacting her daughter. And for the first time during that conversation, and we had been working to try to create a breakthrough, I actually felt the sadness that she must have had, even though it wasn't on the surface at that moment. I felt for the first time the kind of sadness she probably had because she was so disconnected from her daughter, because she was really actually hurting her daughter in some ways by being the role model who was so significance driven, and ultimately she caused that, and the fact that her daughter's daughter would also probably be hurt by that as well if she didn't get that resolved. And so as I talked to her about that, and I used some very radical language, if you remember this intervention, And I won't go back there and discuss that. That's not the point. But ultimately, what she got from that is she felt that sadness that I knew she had that wasn't on the surface. It came to the surface, and we both started to cry. Now, the richness that came from that was her getting her daughter back, number one. But number two, what's interesting, I never met her daughter, but her daughter actually had watched this video after we had actually edited it down and put it together in the DVD set. She had actually watched the video, and she said, Mom, for the first time, I heard somebody talk about me in a way where I felt like they actually understood me. And he doesn't even know me. Like, he never even met me. And it's like he knew me. And the reason I could appreciate that, the reason I could kind of get inside her daughter's head and what she felt, what she experienced without ever having to even meet her daughter, was because I saw the situation. I understood it. I appreciated it. I experienced it all because I had her tell her story. I understood what made her tick, and I understood how that had impacted her daughter as well. All that came from being inside my client at the time, really entering the client, really entering that person that I'm trying to influence, I'm trying to understand. I even understood her daughter, even though her daughter wasn't even there. So this is a matter of feeling what they're feeling them. And the gift from that is expansion of you and your choices as to how you can help someone and how you can influence your clients. So does that make sense? There's a lot of facets and understandings to this client crystal ball, to seeing inside your client, understanding what makes them tick, how do they think, what are their beliefs, how do they run their life, and why, and really deeply appreciating, empathizing, and kind of putting yourself inside of your client's shoes. And once you're there, you'll realize exactly why they do what they do, why they feel the way they feel, and actually why they might be stuck in a particular area where they're reaching out to you for help. And what I'm going to share with you now is that real life example of transformation that I actually discussed and began to explain to you in the end of that last video excerpt that we talked about within strategy training in Master Coach University. So I'm actually going to show you this example, this live example in video form, and it's going to give you a sense of how I actually use that client crystal ball ability to read what was going on for Beverly and also what was actually going on with her daughter, as I discussed in that last video excerpt. So as you observe this example that I'm about to share with you, try to get a sense of when I'm using some of what we talked about in that last excerpt and how I'm getting that crystal ball to work for me and the impact that it has on Beverly as we're having that coaching session. Let's take a look. She wants significance, really, and that's an operational need. But she really needs love and connection. That's what really drives her. It's just currently she's not living that.
Yeah.
And the reason she's not living that is
maybe I don't feel authentic in getting it just like that. Maybe I feel like I have to be significant to get the love and connection.
So what do you believe? You have to be significant to get love?
Oh, for sure.
Okay. And what was a significant emotional event that taught you that?
Probably being given up for adoption. I was always in contact with both sets. Okay. So my foster family and also my real family.
Okay.
So there was that pull, constantly having to please everybody, make all the families love me.
So now and by the way, back then you really were driven by love. That was your number one, operationally speaking, as well.
Okay, right, I see that.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, I see that.
So when did it become significance? When did it change?
I bet when my sister was born. That little twerp changed everything. I bet that, because that was 8.
And they gave her all the love, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I had, yeah, that's it.
So they gave you all this unconditional love for quite a long time. You were kind of riding that to a certain extent. You were actually missing out on love to a certain extent before, what's your sister's name?
Cindy.
Before Cindy came along. But then when Cindy comes along, then you're like, well, now at least I got somebody to blame for it. And so you didn't get love, and you went for instead. When people don't get love, what do they go after? You can't get love. What do you go after? What do you pursue? Significance. You're going to go after something. So you can't get the love. You might as well be significant. And how did you get significance when your sister was born? What did you do to get significance, to be more significant?
Oh, I'd be funny or act out or do stuff to get the attention back to me.
Yeah.
Constantly.
And we never see that. I've never noticed that.
Huh.
It's amazing how you hide that part of yourself inside, you know?
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. But deep down, there's something she's trying to avoid. There's things she's trying to avoid, and that will also tell us what the drivers are. What she's trying to avoid is losing certain needs. That would be pain. If she lost certainty, it's not that much of a problem. She still has to have it, like we all do. But if she lost certainty, that's not like death compared to losing love. Losing love, if you lost love, you had no love, no one loved you.
That'd be awful.
What would happen?
I would be depressed and never come out from under the covers.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so it's not just certainty. She doesn't care about certainty as much, but she definitely wants certainty about love. Because you want to be in control of whether or not people love you.
Right.
She's certain about that. So we know what the top two needs, I think, are now, which is you are all about the significance and you're all about the love. You really want the love. The significance is just something you're doing operationally speaking. So it's really love first and significance second. That's really what it is, operationally speaking, based upon what you're telling me at least.
This moment, yeah. Okay.
There are people probably where you flipped it, but that's probably because their love is not as important, is not as significant to you anymore.
Yes, because right.
Yeah. So with those individuals, you go for the significance because you don't feel as significant with them loving you as other people loving you, whatever that is, based upon your rules.
Okay.
So you flipped it, operationally speaking, there, but you still want the love number one. And in fact, if they stopped loving you, like really stopped loving you, you might all of a sudden make it important again.
Yes, because I want everyone to like me. It's okay if I don't like them, but I want them to like me.
But if you know, and here's why we know she's not certainty driven, is because the people that always love her, she's like, okay, whatever. I gotta go get the people that don't yet love me, or that maybe won't love me. She wants the jackpot. She wants the variety of love.
Yeah, because I want everyone.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially the ones that don't yet love you, or only love you a certain amount. Or love you at times but not others.
That's messed up. Yeah. Yep, that's it.
The animal part of you is like, I have to be loved.
Yes.
That is not, because there was one moment in your life when, again, before your sister, what's her name again?
Cindy.
Before Cindy was born, they're just like, you lost love, and it's like, that's it, I have to get love. Then when Cindy was born, it's like, wait a second, I have to get love. They're starting to love Cindy a little bit. I got to do something to fix this.
Right.
You know, so she was already trained at that point. There's something before where she was rejected, and she's like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm unworthy of love. And so there's a moment where all of a sudden, instead of unconditional love from mom, you get a harsh tone or a look or slapped or ignored, even worse. And that was like 4 or 5 probably when that happened.
Yep.
And then you're like, okay, I realize I got to jump through some hoops now to get love. I can't just lay around and poop in my pants anymore. So now you start jumping through those hoops, and now you got them trained again. So, okay, it's working. I'm pleasing them now. They're even more pleased. And then Cindy's born, and it's like, okay, now they're pleased by Cindy. That's the problem. And you create this relationship with Cindy and all this kind of stuff. It's all about love for you. You're a love bug. You're not just addicted to love. I mean, life is for you is love. It's getting love and manipulating and utilizing ways to get the love for yourself or feel it. And avoid losing the love as well. So it's getting it, getting more of it, and it's also avoiding losing it. So you see, she doesn't really have a major vehicle for significance. Which was, by the way, one of the reasons why you thought, and we thought, it might be number one, is because you're super hungry for it right now, and you're pursuing it, and you're doing all this variety of things to get it, really to get the love, but significance isn't on top. It just looks like it's on top right now. It might really be on top operationally speaking currently, but it's definitely love is number one. But it's
Because
there.
I'm going to get the love and connection from my clients too.
Yeah. It's just another way to get love for you. It's just a significant way to get it where you get more attention and you can keep playing that game. So what was the last significant vehicle in your life? In other words, the thing that you did or were or had that made you, that you knew you were significant. And it's not there anymore probably, but what was it?
My job.
And what did you do?
I was an account executive with Linder.
And what about that was significant? In other words, if I asked you, well, why is that so important, or why does that make you significant, what would you say?
Because I was one of the best.
One of the best. It's right there. And then now you don't have that vehicle anymore.
No.
And by the way, when that vehicle went away, or when you thought it was going to go away, in that experience, what was that like for you?
I had to re-identify myself. I had to figure out what I wanted to do. Like, who am I now?
Yeah. It's a who am I kind of thing, which is really what she does. It's a career. You see the career is the vehicle? Her career is her vehicle for significance. And she doesn't have that right now. So it was really about love, but that was the way you got it. It was what had to happen. So you just wanted the significance. You didn't really care about that. But it's still probably number two as far as what your needs were. And then now that's gone away. And now there's uncertainty. That's, by the way, again, why you feel like you're uncertain. It's not because it's important. It's just you just need the significance back. And now you're uncertain about how you're going to get significance. So now, here's what just happened to her in her life. She lost all her significance. She didn't lose her love, but now she's probably not feeling it as much or not loving herself as much because maybe it motivates her or whatever. But she's concerned about it at least. And she's uncertain about the next thing that she's going to get for significance, which you can survive, but it's still not fun. It's at least uncomfortable. She's uncomfortable. She's uncertain. She's unworthy now or insignificant. Yep. So you actually got a ton of variety, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And you're doing the variety thing, but what you're definitely missing is you're definitely missing significance and you're definitely missing certainty right now, which makes it look like those two are really high. But they're really not. It's just when they go down to one or two, like right now in your entire life, how much certainty do you have? How certain do you feel on a regular basis? On
Not
0
much.
to 10?
3.
Like a 3 in certainty. And when you had the job, how much?
10.
Yeah, it's like 10 right there. So in the that literally, let's just translate and put it into words that everybody can understand. I thought I was going to get my significance from the mortgage world, but now I'm not so certain about getting my significance from the mortgage world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide that they're insignificant. Because if I thought they were significant in that moment, I would have to feel rejected by them, which would make me feel insignificant.
That's exactly it.
So I can so now I'll just lie to myself so I can feel insignificant. You will BS yourself and others to be significant. And you get connection from people because you go from group to group to group, and that's all they have time for because they can never grow to love you because you move on. And I'm not saying you move on like you haven't divorced your husband, but you left him a long time ago. Didn't you?
My husband?
Yeah. You left him.
Left him in what way?
Yeah.
You gave up. You don't get love from Dewey anymore because he's just the pawn in your game that you made up a long time ago. And you don't give him love either. So you're unloved, and you're trying to get the significance, and the way that you get it is in a low-level way. You know, it's like you hurt somebody else and you feel significant for it. Mm-hmm. Is that real? Do you really feel significant when you do that?
Oh, probably not.
Yeah, not really. It's a short, it's
just
a low
that,
level.
Instant.
Yeah.
It's like being judgmental, just for that moment.
So again, you're unloved. You don't love yourself right now. You have during the coaches training. I know you have. So I honor you for that. But before that, it seems like you didn't. Is that fair to say?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
She uses that as I'll only give love when I'm significant. As soon as you take significance away from her, love disappears. And people know that about you, which is why they are conditional with you on their love.
Yep.
So it's a conditional game. So now put yourself 20 years in the future with doing that game. Now you know why you said that. You were right. You see that you were right?
Yeah.
You were right in the first thing you said. You
alone.
always know the answer. And as you get older and older, you now not only don't people connect with you, but they definitely don't love you. And also you feel the regret of knowing you could have changed it and realizing it wasn't other people, it was really you. So that would definitely be you not even loving yourself. How will you feel when that happens?
I would think suicidal.
Yeah.
Life ending. Yeah, I'd be done. Done.
So if you know that that's and by the way, how have you impacted your daughters by being their role model? Are they this fucked up?
One is.
One is.
Yeah.
What's going on with her? What's her life like? That's right. What is that?
She's starting to get there. You know
I'm
what I
talking
mean?
about what has been going on before this. Because we're talking about we're in leverage stage right now. So
Okay,
let's
all right.
look at how
Okay.
you're
Yep.
impacting your daughter.
Right.
What's her
Yep.
name again? Okay, so how are you impacting Sarah?
She doesn't even want to try.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to do. She doesn't drive. She doesn't have a driver's license. She just barely got a job. She's living at home. She goes from
What's her emotional locomotive? What's her fuel of choice? What's her feeling that she goes through, or she had been going through on a regular basis? How's she
unloved. Totally unloved.
Yeah.
All alone.
feel? Right. Yeah. So she settled for a really low level of connection, and she said, "I'm not going to be this significance bitch like my mom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be all about love, but I'm going to give everybody love, and I'm not even going to love myself." So she actually did what you did to a certain extent. She looked for it externally.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't love herself, so she modeled that part of you. But the surface part, the superficial side, seeing, well, I don't want to use significance to get love like my mom, so I'm not going to use anything to get love. I'm just going to have the lowest level of connection. So she just rebelled against what you were doing, but she actually modeled you. She's a lot more like you than you know. And by the way, that's one of the ways that you can have empathy for her. Because she just like you, love is her highest value. Or her highest, her need,
Okay.
the top need that she
Right.
has.
Okay.
And she doesn't feel it.
Okay.
And so she's in constant pain as a result of that. So here's the thing. You're in charge. I mean, understand this stuff. So you're in charge of your own life. You can make your own decisions for you. So I'm okay. I mean, I'm not attached to you getting that 20-year endpoint and being alone or whatever. And for that matter, you can probably survive, and I think you can, which is probably possibly one of the reasons why you haven't changed it, because you're really not about yourself. You really are about your family. You really are about love. You're a loving person. You just haven't been acting that lately, especially. But it's because of this pattern that we've realized. But your daughter has amplified that dramatically. So for you, it's like you've already lived a great life, and your life will be okay no matter what. And I'm okay with whatever you do. But to fuck up your daughter, I got a fucking problem with that. And I think you do too.
For sure.
The question is, why did she really behave that way?
Because she wanted love.
How did
my
you
love.
impact that, though?
Because I didn't give it to her.
Yeah, you didn't give it to her. And not only did you not give it to her, but she saw the way you got love. And so she was just like, Mom gets love this way, why can't I get love that way? So she really loves you, and she really needs your love too. And she hasn't gotten it at the level that she needed to at the time.
Right.
What are you going to do to correct that? Let me ask you this. How much significance would you have if you knew that even no matter what was going on in your life, like you had matured and done what you really know is right for you and other people, and it wasn't just a low level of consciousness getting love, it was a higher level of consciousness of giving love. It could be you giving it to them, whether or not they give it back. If you did that, how significant would you feel?
Yeah, unboundless. I mean,
How much more would you love yourself?
how could I not love myself?
Yeah.
That just gives me opportunity. I'd grow, expand, I'd be...
Right.
Yeah.
And you can still do the fun stuff and all that kind of stuff, but there'll be more to you then.
It feels like it just takes the judgment away, too. So
Yeah.
I don't know why, but...
So what are you going to do with your daughter? Not just doing that. What are you going to, because you got to speak to this with your daughter.
Maybe I take that justification away.
Yeah.
And instead, I just come to her from the raw place of me of how painful it was and how sorry I am.
Yeah. How would it feel if you shared with her not just what you know now consciously, but to really express your regret?
It would unlock my own guilt.
Yeah.
Sure.
And if you forgave yourself enough to go ahead and express your regret for her, then what would you be doing for her in that moment? What would be the gift for her?
Well, what you don't know is that this also happened to her with her daughter. So it would alleviate her guilt.
Yeah. And you can love her, and you can express, and by the way, and you can cry just the way that you're crying now with her, can't you?
Mm-hmm.
And then she'll know. And she'll know herself because she'll see you maturing, she'll mature along with you, and then she'll forgive herself, and whatever's happening with her daughter, that can start to unravel. You are the linchpin in it all. Do you see that?
Yes. Oh, but really it's me. I'm maturing.
See that?
Oh, finally.
Give her an applause for that. But isn't that the case? It's like this is really about you growing up.
Wow.
Because a little kid will scream for significance. You had your own way of doing that that's socially acceptable.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of invisible. But there's that little girl inside and she's always going to be there, but there's a mature part of you that has been undervalued and undernourished, and you're finally starting to nourish her. But you can turn all that around.
Okay.
And then what will happen from that is the dominoes will fall. Mm-hmm. And it will all come back to you. And the love that you wanted from everybody other than the people that you really needed it from will come from them. And it'll really come from yourself no matter what happens for them. And then they'll be able to get the love as well. How would it feel for you, for her, to actually truly have her forgiveness?
Like Jello.
Yeah.
Like, finally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it starts with you because you know this stuff. So what did you think? It was a pretty phenomenal transformation that you saw in Beverly just in, literally minutes. And that client crystal ball ability is part of what helped me reach inside and see exactly what was going on. In fact, half of that example that I just showed you was really me talking to Beverly about what's really going on, utilizing that crystal ball before the transformation was even possible. If you can't see what's happening with your client, chances are they won't, and no change is possible. No real magic is going to happen, and the transformation wizardry will be out of your reach. So that crystal ball is that first tool that you need to get access to real transformation wizardry, the magic of providing that for any client in any situation for that matter. Now I'm going to share with you the 3 phases of transformation, and these 3 phases are common to any client that you'll pretty much ever work with. And the neat thing is these are phases that they've already gone through at times in their lives, and really you just need to tap into them. So let's go back to the Strategy Coaches Immersion Training in Master Coach University, where we discover and talk about the 3 phases of transformation. Transformation is this final piece that we're really talking about. When we talk about intervention, we're talking about providing true transformation for someone. That's not just leadership. It's not just understanding and diagnosing. It's really actually intervening so somebody's life is different. And that's really what your outcome is in this training or in coaching in general, in your work that you're doing with us or anybody else. So there's 3 aspects of the chemistry of transformation. Number 1, satiation. Number 2, dissatisfaction. And number 3, threshold. Now let's talk about each of these. First, satiation. Now in this step, this is the first step in this kind of journey that people go through when they truly transform. And in satiation, you get satiated. Things are going pretty well, and you kind of got a lot of good things going for you in a particular vehicle, let's say. But after a while, you start to get sick of that. You begin to look for a new way of looking at life. And even if what you're doing is working, and a lot of times that's the case, you get sick of it and you look for something new. Now, the next step that people go to is dissatisfaction. This is usually where you're going to meet your clients. You're going to find people in this training, or people that you attract as a coach, are currently in dissatisfaction. Now, dissatisfaction is a powerful place because it usually brings somebody to at least bitch about it and talk to you about what's going on. But it's not enough to get somebody to the final step in transformation, or else they already would have gone there, right? So they really need you to bring them from dissatisfaction to true transformation, and the threshold that we'll talk about in a second. But talking about dissatisfaction only here, dissatisfaction, this is when you usually take some action, you try to make some changes, you talk to a coach, you sign up for a training, you try to make some change, you dabble in some things, but you're pretty much riding the fence. You're really not doing it full out. You're not fully committed yet. And so usually this is like complaint mode. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to have to have my life the way it is. I wish it was different. And there's a lot of complaining that happens at this level. But you usually hang on to the very thing that you're complaining about because it actually meets your needs. This is for you or your client or any human being. The reason why we don't change is not because we don't want to change. It's because whatever we're up to that's stopping us from changing, or whatever we're up to that we even want to change, is something that still meets our needs. So there's a certain level of addiction that we have to it. Finally, if you do a great coaching job, or if things go bad enough, long enough, you'll reach what we call threshold. And threshold is where you truly connect emotionally to the change that needs to happen. This is what we call a trance state. It's an altered state of mind. You will feel this at a deep level. You go inside and start to link something up. You start to make new connections. This is commonly known as the last straw. This is usually the point where it's so painful that you finally say, that's it, not another minute, not another second. I'm not going to let my life stay this way. I'm going to change now, today. That's it. The last straw. That's threshold. But most people don't go there unless they get just a significant amount of pain. But if they came here to this training, if they came to your coaching, and they're talking to you, or they're listening to my voice right now, then they're ready to change now. And the reason is that they wouldn't have paid the fee, the tuition, spent the time, complained so much, gotten to this point where they're at they're right at the precipice of change if they weren't ready to change. If they didn't already know that now is the time to make that change and to transform. That now is the time. And they were just waiting for that moment to choose. And you can provide them, or yourself, with that final threshold, with that final impetus to change, that final last straw, that final decision that today is going to be different and no other day in the future is ever going to be that way again. Because you will change within yourself, or your client will change within themselves. That's a conversation you can have with them. And there are a variety of ways that we do that, obviously, in these different master steps, getting leverage, finding empowering alternatives, conditioning it, etc. That's the technique of it. But in this video, we're really more talking about the overriding understanding of where they need to go. So this will help you kind of track with where your clients need to go and why they need to do it, and kind of the steps that are involved overall in how you're going to lead them and ultimately intervene so they can have a different life, different relationship, different finances, different job, different career, different health, whatever it is for them that they need to transform, or all of the above, just different person.
When you gain those emotional insights around a change in your life, there is an opening. So when you get to that kind of threshold level, there's an opening, a door opens, if you will. Your nervous system opens up. You feel things with an honesty and a clarity that you have not yet had. And you'll notice those kind of eureka moments that happen. It's not just kind of getting an insight. There's a deeper insight in a threshold moment than just, oh, that's really interesting. No, it's more like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. I didn't realize what I was doing to myself. I didn't realize what the alternatives were. I didn't realize, where I was and why I need to change right now. Once that nervous system opens up, once that insight opens up at that deep level of threshold, and you have an honesty and a clarity about that you have not yet had, whether or not your life transforms is based upon whether you step through the opening and take action. If you don't step through the opening, it closes, and you have to start all over again. If your client, if you get them all the way to threshold, you've been fighting with them and battling and getting leverage and you're, wrestling through all these different issues, and finally you get this insight and they realize why they need to change now, and they start to gravitate to different needs, or they realize the new belief, the limiting belief, the pain that's caused them, and they finally say, that's it, I've got to change. You don't get them to step through that opening. Take action on that new insight. It closes. And they got to start all over again next session. You got to dredge the whole thing up again. And eventually it'll be like, you know what? We know all about this. And it's like a therapist, like you gave them a diagnosis. Like, you're schizophrenic. Well, great. What am I going to do about that? Sorry, it's really not curable. Here's some drugs. Right? And we just get into the point where we're like, yeah, I know all about this stuff, but we don't really do anything about it. We're just stuck at that opening. We keep opening the door, looking through, and not actually stepping through and doing anything. And so this just becomes what a lot of coaches are afraid of, which is, oh, my coaching will just be talk and I'm not really going to help anybody. Well, the truth is that is possible if you really don't get somebody to step through. Now, part of that could be an accountability coach, but part of that's you as the strategy coach really getting that final piece of leverage so they'll just start taking action immediately. There's a lot of different ways that they could take action, but you got to get them started on that journey, or else they got to start all over again. When you create that emotional opening with your client, get them to seize that moment and step through that opening.
So that's it. Actually pretty simple, don't you think? Now, by the way, did you notice that Beverly went through all three of those phases, or at least shared those three phases as she transformed through that conversation that we had and through her own experience of her life and her desire to make changes for herself and her daughter at that point? Didn't she go through satiation? Didn't she go through a point of dissatisfaction? That's really what got her talking to me at that point. And then finally she hit threshold, the point where it was just, that's it, I've had enough. I've got to make this change. And I had to bring her there. And that was a big part of the transformation wizardry that I had to bring to the table in that conversation. And if you didn't notice those three phases, go back, rewind this video, and actually take a look at it again through the eyes of those three phases of transformation that we just discussed, because I can promise you, you will see them if you look closely enough. So that's a little bit of a view inside of the strategy coaching immersion training inside of Master Coach University, and a little bit of the transformation wizardry, as well as those three phases of transformation that my students and I use to rapidly change lives. Oh, and by the way, before I let you go, please share with me what you learned in this video and what you thought, and how you maybe have already used some of these elements with your clients, or how you're planning on using them with your clients, and also any questions that you have about the elements that we talked about in this video. And I promise you I'll take a look at your comments, and I might even have a chance to answer some of them as well. And by the way, if you've got friends that you think this would make a difference for, share it with them, and hopefully it'll make a difference for them as well. I can't wait to see what kind of difference we can make just by sharing some of the simple elements that sometimes looks like wizardry, but can truly cause transformation for our lives and the lives of the clients and the people around us that we touch. So share this video, let me know what you think and any questions that you have, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video.
All right, fantastic. So did you learn something? Did you see some mechanics there rather than just mystical, magical craziness, right? So this is what we're after here, is to actually get clear on the mechanics. So let me give you a different way to look at the mechanics of, human behavior and human emotion and the spirit of humanity, if you will. So this is just an overview of some of the main mechanics that I actually look at if I really have to have limited time and in a short period of time need to really transform the way somebody experiences life or behaves in a certain part of their life. So first, there's two areas that I look at. And the first one is something called representational systems. I just call it rep systems for short. And these are ways that we represent the world within ourselves. And externally as well. So as human beings, we interact with the world, right? And so in order to do that, we can take external actions, right? We could do things physically, we can experience the world that's outside of us, but also we could do things internally. We can imagine things, so to speak, right? And so this internal and external representation of the world, expression of the world, is something that we can map out and ceases to be something that we're unconscious of. And when we're conscious of it, we can mechanically start to fool with it, because this is how people actually produce human experience and produce human performance and behavior ultimately. So for instance, one representational system that we're all aware of is visual, things that we can see. And we can see things externally, like you can see me on the video right now, chances are, or you can see things internally, like you could close your eyes right now if you're not driving and imagine me, and you could probably make a pretty good picture, maybe even a better one, even though you can't actually see me externally. So there's internal and external representations of the world, right? Ultimately, it all goes internal, but it starts, the source of it is either external or internal. Then we have auditory experiences. And so you can either hear my voice or you can imagine something that you might hear within yourself, internal and external. We also have digital experiences of meanings and words, and like talking to yourself, but not with a very particular voice, but just knowing what words are going through your head, so to speak. So that's a digital experience, an experience of meaning, if you will, or code. Then finally, we have kinesthetic experiences. So we have experiences of feelings, internal feelings that we imagine, external feelings that if I actually touch you, you can feel something there, unless you have nerve damage, right? So there's different representations. Now there's others other than this. These are just the main ones. And those representational systems ultimately becomes what the world is to us. It becomes how we set our own mentality, our own state of mind. Now, so all these different representational systems kind of get processed at one moment, and we don't do just this consciously, but we have a state of mind or an emotion that we can go into. And everybody has these, right? You're in a state of mind right now. I'm in a state of mind right now. And the state of mind is made up of all these representational systems, but they're kind of shunted into a constellation of three main forces. Physiology, the way you use your body internally and externally. Language, the way that you kind of talk to yourself and others, either with words or sounds or pictures, let's say. And then finally, focus and beliefs. Like, what do you actually choose to focus on? What is the operating belief that is kind of the umbrella under which you're living and experiencing and acting right at this moment? What is kind of the organizing principle behind it all, right? We all have all of these things that are going on all at once, all the time, and that makes up your state of mind, your emotion, which ultimately creates your performance and your experience of life as well. Because the way you use visual, auditory, digital, and kinesthetic representational systems, by bringing them together in a language, focus and beliefs, and physiology, creates emotion. It creates your state of mind. So you can bring these together in a way that's depressing, or you can bring it together in a way that's enlightening, right? And I've obviously, most of us have done, much of both And what I'm telling you here is that when you did those things, when you felt those things, when you experienced those things, you weren't like caught up in some magical, mystical thing. You were just doing all this. You were just bringing this together to a point where you had experience of life, and people are just, this is so mysterious to them. It's like there's no mystery about it if you could just get this is what you're doing. This is what your client is doing as well. And then ultimately what happens is these states and emotions, these representations are ordered in a syntax. Hopefully you can see that on my board here. It's at the bottom. And then so you'll do one triad and then you'll do one representation, and you do things in a certain order, and it ends up creating kind of a habitual, let's say a pattern, if you will. Those are the patterns of human experience, human behavior, human emotion, human performance, and on and on and on. That's all your life is just a couple codes that are ordered in a sequence that's probably very different than almost anybody else, but these patterns also have similarities as well. So, for instance, as I was talking about earlier, let's say you have a client, like I did, who had a fear of flying. Well, that client had a very specific focus and physiology, what we would call a triad or an emotion, when he flew. But the way he set himself up to have that emotion is he would do very specific representational systems in a specific order. And I discovered this as I talked to him about it. So first, because really I was like, wow, you're afraid of flying? He said, yeah. And I said, wow, that's amazing. How do you do that? How do you do this fear of flying? Because he didn't think of it as something he's doing. He thought of it as something he had. It was like a virus he caught. It was just like some accidental thing that happened to him. But it wasn't. That's the magical thinking that we got to erase in ourselves, at least, if not our client. So I discovered the first thing he would do when he would get on the plane is he would look around and he would sit down and he would look outside and he would make a picture, a visual internal picture, because it wasn't real. He'd imagine a picture of a plane crashing, of his plane crashing and him going down with it, kind of going down in flames. And it was really vivid picture, right? And then he would start breathing really fast. So this was kinesthetic, using your body. External, he would do an actual change in his physical movement, right? And then he would start talking to himself in auditory, digital, internal. He wouldn't say this out loud. He would say things like, how can this thing fly? It's too heavy. The mechanics don't make sense. And so he basically have some feelings, and then he would have this like logical conversation about those feelings to justify why he was so tripped out about this whole thing, right? This was it. And then so all this stuff came together at once or very quickly into this constellation of language and beliefs. And basically the belief was, I'm going to die. This I'm going to die belief was basically orchestrating this whole thing. So no wonder, if that's what you believe and this is what you create in your head, it's not going to be that hard to make fear happen, right? You could probably reproduce this next time you're in an airplane or any time for that matter. It's not that hard. He was doing this, but he was unconscious of it. So to him, it was some magical phenomenon that he couldn't control. Now, what I did with him then was actually reprogram him, so to speak, with different reps systems and a different mental syntax, a different order, where flying, instead of being fearful, flying was fun. And so we talked about this kind of visual internal picture of off-roading. Like when there's turbulence, you're just bouncing up and down on the different densities of air, just like you would in a Jeep, going up and down the sand dunes. And he would visualize externally when he look out at the wing, and he would look at the aerodynamics and see kind of like what was going on with the wing and how the whole plane was held up by this amazing phenomenon as it went through the air so quickly. Right? So he cognated this differently because we had him focus on different things, and he had a new belief. He was a very creative man, and he had a new belief that I'm Peter Pan. He's basically just like bouncing around on the air, and he was having a great fun. He was just making up all these crazy stories that were fun for him, whereas before he was creatively making up crazy stories that were fearful for him. And he could have fun because he actually justified it before he started dialing in this new fun state of mind. And then instead of having fear as the physiology, he had excitement. He was still breathing kind of fast, but he was having a good time doing it. He was actually enjoying the flight rather than dreading the flight. Are you starting to see the mechanics of this? So that's it. I mean, that's all I got for you today. There's nothing more to it. I mean, you can get more detailed about this, but at the end of the day, your job is just to be a good mechanic. And if you want to align your chakras and do hallelujah, amen with your clients, because that's their particular dogma, or that's kind of the magical thinking that they really respect and appreciate, then more power to you. Like, I'm not going to tell you don't do that. But what I want to make sure that you get is that you don't hold yourself back by getting into this, like being overwhelmed by some fear or by depression or by somebody's anger or something. It's just a pattern. It's not personal. It's not some hex that some witch put on somebody. It's just something that somebody learned to do that doesn't work for them very well. And your job is to find out what it is and change it. And whatever your style of doing that that's up to you. But don't limit yourself by being overwhelmed by the magic of something and thinking that, that there's these unforeseen forces that you can't do anything about, because it's simply not true, at least in reference to these basic things. What seems like advanced to a lot of coaches is actually quite basic when you see the mechanics of it. So here are your actions, your assignments here, speaking of mechanics. Number one, I want you to think of a magical problem that a client has. A client you're working with right now they've got some magical problem, and I want you to think about it in a different way than you've ever thought about it before, unless you already know this stuff, which is I want you to think about it scientifically. In terms of mental syntax and what we call a triad, just another fancy way of saying the mechanics and the forces that are at play in emotion. Go back and review the video if that's something that you're not clear on. So just think about it scientifically and really see if you can kind of like study it, right? Number two, ask yourself, what are they doing mechanically? And if you don't know, ask them. Find out what they're doing. Find out what their mental syntax is. Number three, ask yourself, what do I think they should do mechanically? Like, what are the mechanics that they should be doing that would work better for them? Because that's the new strategy that they can learn, that you can kind of program them with. Four, what strategy do you need to use in order to induce that shift from one strategy to another? Because sometimes people, it's easy to see what they're doing and what they should do, but it doesn't mean that you can just like make them do the other thing. They've been doing that first thing for a while. It's habit. They probably meet needs by doing that. So what strategy do you need to approach them with so that they'll actually be inducted into the new way of doing it that's really going to work better for them? And then fifth action, final action, go do it. Get the work done. Start turning some nuts and bolts here, and let's make some mechanics, which your client might look at as magic, happen. And if you have any questions about this, please let me know. If you liked the video, if it made a difference, if it helped you, give us a like. You could always subscribe to our videos if you want more like this. But share it with somebody that you care about, that maybe they've got some things that they think are magical that are happening to them, but it's really just mechanics, and you like to see them see past the illusion, to be disillusioned to the point of actually getting that what's going on in their life is a lot more mechanics than it is magic. I'll talk to you soon.